The country of Japan has one of the most interesting militaries in the world. It's one of the most peaceful militaries, but it's also one of the most dangerous militaries, literally, in the world, and you can almost thank the United States for this because of what's happening today. Now, as far as Japan goes, there's also a really big misconception. A lot of people believe, well, Japan, as big as they are, they can never technically attack, they can only defend themselves. But guess what? Even countries like the US, they use this strategy to defend themselves to actually attack the enemy. So let's get into all of this and actually look into how Japan has managed to create one of the biggest superpower militaries in the world. Let's go ahead and look at this chart. Now, first things first, when you look at the top militaries in the world, they're also the biggest spenders in the world. I mean, you have to pay for a navy, you got to pay your personnel, you know what I'm talking about. Now, this chart's interesting because you can see the rapid growth rate that the Japanese have implemented in their military budget. Now, this graph is from 1952 up until 2021, but I'll tell you this right now. For the 2023 budget in the Japanese military, it's about $58 billion. But it's interesting to see all the way back in 55, we're looking at a little under 10 billion, maybe up in the 10 billion. So you can see in this graph, with this direct rate of growth, spending, you also have a more powerful military, because I have something else to show you. So check this out. Japan is ranked number 8 in top militaries in the world. So what is happening? Why is Japan just building and building and spending and spending? Well, they do have enemies in the region that Japan has always been a little weary of. You have North Korea and you have China. And so Japan is justifying the spending and building and training upon these two countries. And guess what? It's working because Japan is becoming, again, one of the most powerful militaries in the region of the Pacific, where China and North Korea are actually taking Japan as a serious threat. But Japan has also taken them as a serious threat. Now let's actually look into what is happening. How is Japan able to do this? Is it US influence, or is it more Japanese need to defend themselves in case an all-out war breaks out? Let's start with North Korea. This is the most obvious one, considering North Korea is highly unstable, and then we'll tackle the Chinese issue because it's a little more complicated than China's expanding, we need to attack China. When it comes to North Korea, this is a chart or graph from 2022 showing a missile launch that literally flew over Japanese territories. Now, look, this is an immediate threat. This is like you standing there with your best friend and you shoot around right past them and say, well, I was just training, I didn't mean to launch it towards you. Consider this, Japan has legitimate reasons and belief and historical records to show that North Korea cannot be trusted, and we can't rely on the United States to defend us. So Japan has a ton of justification out of almost every country in this region to build and raise their funds to defend themselves from a country like North Korea. Now, does this mean that Japan can go and invade North Korea? Well, yes, they technically can, and we'll look into this policy, but understand this, I'm only showing you that there is justification and reason within North Korea to Japan to defend themselves. Now, as far as the Japanese military, they technically are one of the most passive militaries in the world, but again, I'm here to debunk that notion that this is not necessarily true, because it doesn't make sense that Japan is the most peaceful military, they're just here to defend themselves, yet they're in the top 10 militaries in the world. Now, you do have something called Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution. Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution states, it's a clause in the Constitution of Japan outlining war as a means to settle international disputes involving the state. The Constitution came into effect on May 3rd, 1947, following the surrender of Japan in World War II. So now we have an interesting balance of the United States sort of implementing this article to, protect the assets of the United States, protect the region, because understand this, the Japanese were really good at what they did, and they were sort of almost like the North Korea of the Pacific. They were a little unhinged, they did whatever they want, they did really bad things to China, we'll get to that in a second. So this made total sense to implement what's called Article 9. It was a way to defend the entire region, also to include the Philippines. However, Japan has a new clause, and even though this clause can be a little in the gray area of being on the defense, It pretty much implies that Japan can strike a nation in order to defend themselves before getting hit first. But let's be honest, because Japan did this, it sort of instigated a reason for China now to take the Japanese serious, and Japan really put this clause out there, not so much for North Korea like we talked about, because look, even the United States or South Korea have no idea what to do in North Korea. This clause really is for Chinese expansion into the China Sea, etc. Japan has made significant policy change to allow it to get to the ability to strike other nations, a move widely seen as a major step forward to rearming the nation more than 7 decades since it's demilitarized after World War II. As Japan relations with China worsen and the threat it perceives from its much larger neighbor heightens, the Japanese government gave a green light Friday to proposals it has been debating sporadically since at least 1956. So again, the law did pass, and Japan has the ability now to strike first if justified. Not necessarily over a military conflict or military means, as in like, hey, we don't like that you did that, we have the military power to stop you. No, it has to be justified. And of course, the U.S. military and other regions in the Pacific, or other countries in the Pacific, there's probably a checks and balances to control the Japanese in case they try to do some crazy stuff. But nonetheless, I'm here to debunk the fact that Japan actually does have the ability to strike first if need be. Now, as far as China goes, looking at the differences between the Chinese military and the Japanese military, on paper, China has a way more powerful military and they have a way higher budget. $227 billion compared to $58 billion is a lot. Now, does this mean anything? Yes and no. When it comes to combat operations, this dollar amount doesn't mean too much. What matters is like the reason you're going to fight. Is there a motivation there? Who has the advantage, etc.? So you're probably wondering, well, what is Japan preparing for when it comes to China? Well, Taiwan. Taiwan is a major reason as to why Japan is preparing for an all-out conflict, because they see Taiwan getting attacked as their means to defend themselves, and they'll go in and help defend Taiwan, etc. So I found this article and interesting statements. A Chinese attack on Taiwan would be an emergency for Japan. And for its alliance with the U.S., former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has warned, hinting that an invasion could meet the conditions for Tokyo to use military force. Again, there are checks and balances for Japan to implement their wartime strategy. It has to be justified through defense. And without a doubt, Taiwan is being protected by the United States. And if the United States gets attacked, well, this might affect Japanese interests. So now we have to go and attack. The remarks highlight the growing tensions across the Taiwan Strait and Japan's shift towards more forthright support for Taipei. A military adventure is the road to economic suicide, said Abe. For sure, China is huge, but since it has close ties with the global economy, a military adventure in Taiwan must have a grave impact on the global economy, because consider this, Taiwan has a lot of connectors, they have a lot of microchips, high-tech microchips, so of course China has been trying to undermine them and get their territory back. But Japan says, no, you're going to affect the global trade and economy. And again, that does affect us. I know a lot of people hate how economy could justify a military attack, such as maybe going for oil, going for uranium. But as we sit here and we say, well, that's not right, imagine how you'd feel if all of a sudden your gas prices skyrocketed up to $12 a gallon. I think you'd be like, you know what? Let's just send our military to go check them. And that's essentially what Japan is doing here. Now, as far as today's modern military strength, we're not looking at a World War II type military with over 1 million active like ground troops and this massive air force and the most powerful navy in the world. Not so much that, but we are looking at a very high-tech military and a military that still can do a lot of chaos and damage. So let's go ahead. I have manpower up here, which this website's pretty cool. So you have a total population of 124 million, which is a lot, but that doesn't necessarily correlate to a big military, because another thing you have to know about the Japanese is that they are an all-volunteer force. And this can be good or bad. I mean, the United States has recruitment issues, so they have to pay more money to get more volunteers. But we definitely do have direct correlation that most all volunteer forces, because the soldiers volunteered to be there, you have higher rates of motivation, you have higher quality, because again, they are a professional military, not so much conscript like some of the European countries used, where, you know, these militaries are not that great. A lot of people on paper, but bad motivation, low motivation rates. So active personnel, 240,000. which again is not a lot, but it is a lot, especially when Japan focuses more to be on the defensive. They don't necessarily need millions upon millions of troops to defend their country, but they do and probably will need more if they are going to go on the attack. Reserve personnel, 55,000, paramilitary, 14,000, Air Force, 50,000, Army, 150, and Navy, 51. Now, Japan is also an interesting country to defend and also go on the offensive because they are an island nation. So there needs to be a lot of focus between all of military assets, between the Navy, Air Force, and Army. They all need to work kind of co-equal together. Now, as far as going after China and going to work over in Taiwan, this would be a Navy and air campaign. I don't really see too much the Army being involved. So, of course, this does cut their military in half. That's why I said, when you look at these numbers of top 10 militaries, it all needs to be put into context because China is like top 3, but the issue with China is they have zero combat experience and they have zero means to transport all of these millions of troops that they have to get to where they need to be. I mean, China still uses train carts. They just stuff their soldiers in these train carts like they're sardines to get to where they need to go, whether it's training or just moving troops around. Now, the question is this: did the United States actually create a monster in Japan? I actually think yes. I think the United States had the foreknowledge or knew that, you know what, after World War II, let's try to work together, let's become partners. And Japan now is probably one of the closest allies in the region when it comes to economy, security, you name it. Japan and the United States work hand in hand. Especially the fact that Japan is willing to fight for Taiwan, for the United States, in case China does attack Taiwan. So the United States, they definitely had a big hand in creating this monster of Japan, of just building military assets, saving their money, preparing for another all-out conflict. But again, no one has ever had the guts to ever go and attack Japan. It's mostly been North Korea sending missiles over the country, sort of stirring up the pot because North Korea knows they can get away with anything. But let's be honest, if Japan had to get down and dirty, not only do they have the support of the United States, they also have a very well-trained military, and they also have partners with South Korea. So look, Japan has the motivation, they have the means, and they are one of the most powerful militaries in the world by just sitting there in training, defending themselves, and spending the money to get the means to be there. So yeah, that's the video. Let me know what you guys think about this. It's always interesting to pay attention to Japan because we don't really think about Japan as one of the strongest militaries in the world, but they really are. So pay attention because they really are one of the biggest wild cards in the Pacific, to where without them, there wouldn't be as much stability in the region. China would be doing whatever they want. North Korea would be doing whatever they want. Japan really is holding it down, not only for the region, but for the United States.